Economist.
Henrique Meirelles is president of Brazil's central bank and presides over an economy that's growing faster than it has at any point since the late 1980s. Mr. Meirelles was appointed by President Lula and has held the post since 2003. Before that, he spent his career at Bank Boston. Many analysts reckon that Brazil's economy will grow by 7% in 2010. But is this sustainable? Might Brazil be overstretching itself? To find out, we went to have tea with him at the Brazilian embassy in London. Let's talk a bit about the world economy. Now, as you mentioned, in the crisis of 07-08, Brazil wasn't completely insulated. It did have a tough time, although it recovered more quickly than many people had been expecting, and certainly more quickly than many other major economies. Brazil does have strong internal demand, but it's also part of the world economy. How worried are you about a double-dip recession, which obviously, if that came to pass, would have an effect on Brazil?
There is no doubt that world recession affects everyone and is bad news for everyone, including Brazil, obviously. As you said, Brazil now is growing with a domestic-led demand growth. It's anchored on job creation, on domestic and private consumption, and domestic and private investment. In summary, we are prepared. We have today higher reserves than we had in 08. The Brazilian banking system today is even stronger than it was in 08. The sovereign debt to GDP level at this point is about the same, which was in 08, and the growth rate is about the same as well. In summary, we are prepared.
One thing your central bank has come under fire for from within Brazil is the strength of the real against the US dollar. There's been a very vigorous debate about whether this has hurt domestic manufacturers. How much does that weigh on your mind when you're thinking about interest rates, or are you really just focused on inflation?
We are focused on the internal balance of the economy, the domestic equilibrium. The external balance is guaranteed in the medium and long term by the foreign exchange rate, which is a free-floating one, and by a very large volume of reserves. The domestic balance, yes, we use all the monetary policy instruments in order to keep the economy with inflation on target, growing at a sustainable rate, and as you can see, the bottom line for the economy is the average growth rate is going up, employment is up, etc., which is a result of stable inflation and all the other stabilization results of the economy.
So are you confident saying that that chicken flight path of growth, what people refer to as the quick takeoff and then the fall to earth, is now in the past for Brazil?
Absolutely. We could see by the results of the past crisis. During the years leading to the 07-08 crisis, many analysts would question that, saying, Brazil is doing well, the economy is growing, inflation is stable, balance of payments is also in good condition, but that's because the international economy is going very well. It's a benign scenario. What would it happen when Brazil faced the first real crisis? Brazil did that in 08. We had a 5-month recession, came out of the recession stronger than before, and the economy today is actually facing a different situation than what you could see in the past when the crisis will last for a long period.
Presidente, when economists look at Brazil and think about how fast the economy can grow without running into trouble, they have a problem, because if you use historical data and put it into your model, it tends to tell you that Brazil will explode if GDP grows faster than 4% a year. But one could argue that that historical data isn't all that useful because of the institutional changes Brazil has made in recent years. So how do you, at the Banco Central, how do you go about solving that problem?
The way we address that, we know it's increasing. We know that during a crisis it normally falls as a result of a drop in investment and then recovers again. But rather than to determine at what level of growth it begins to overheat, what we do is a different way. We look for signals of overheating. We have all kinds of macroeconometric models which project inflation and other signals which clearly analyze and check whether the country is moving above or at or below the speed limit, and that's a much more objective and practical way of seeing that rather than to try to predetermine that.
Just finally, things are going so well in Brazil at the moment. Do you think there's a risk of complacency, that people think, well, we're doing so well, we don't really have to implement reforms, Brazil is fine as it is?
Just after the crisis, when the markets became too exuberant, there was an excessive optimism about Brazil, nothing would go wrong, world economy is out of recession, everything is going to be fantastic. We not only issued several warnings saying that too much exuberance, too much euphoria leads to depression. When there are the first bad news, the news from Europe now confirmed that. It's important that we keep the balance, number one, and actually we strengthen even more our prudential regulation, for instance, during this period, exactly to be able to face future crisis if really there is one. And I think that that's a good position to be, but you're right, it's important that we are very much aware of that kind of risk.
That was Henrique Meirelles, President of Brazil's central bank. Bullish about Brazil's prospects, but mindful of potential pitfalls. The rest of the world will be watching to see if Brazil can sustain its impressive growth in the face of economic stability abroad and rising inflation at home.